Is it asexuality or just a low libido? So this is one of the questions I get all the time. How do you differentiate being asexual versus just being disinterested in sex? A good place for us to start will be with a couple of definitions. Let's talk about the difference between asexuality and low libido. So, asexuality is a sexual orientation that describes people who do not or rarely experience sexual attraction. That's the important part there, sexual attraction. So, asexuality is all about describing a person's relationship to sexual attraction, and sexual attraction is something very specific. Sexual attraction describes an attraction to a person or a kind of person that makes you want to have sex with them. So it's being attracted to someone in a very directed way and thinking, hey, I'd maybe like to have sex with that person. So for heterosexual people, that means being sexually attracted to people of the opposite sex. For homosexual people, that's being sexually attracted to people of the same sex. For bisexual and pansexual people, that is having sexual attraction to people of more than one gender, two or more genders, or having sexual attraction to people without regard to gender. In all of those situations, that's about like the direction of sexual attraction. And for asexual people, there is a direction as well. The direction is none. There is no direction. For asexual people, they are not experiencing it for any kind of person. I like to think of sexual attraction as like your factory settings. For most people, they do experience their sexual orientation and sexual attraction as something that's sort of innate. It's a thing that's kind of in them. That idea of being born this way. I like to think of, in a broad sense, sexual attraction as kind of like your factory settings, or that's like where your sexual attraction is directed. Libido or sex drive is also about wanting sex, but it has no direction. It's just sort of like it's that general desire to sort of experience something sexual. There's a very common metaphor that is used in the asexual community to separate the two things. Sexual attraction is like being hungry for pizza, whereas libido is just being hungry. I often think about libido as sort of the volume settings as opposed to the factory settings. Libido is how loud or soft that like desire is. You can also think about it as like sexual attraction is your song that's playing on the radio, and libido is the volume. So it determines how loud or soft that song is playing, how much you're hearing it or how little you're hearing it. But even though these two things are really deeply connected to each other, the direction of your sexual attraction and like the volume of your sexual attraction, they are still two separate things. So when you're exploring this question about whether or not you are asexual, I feel like an important place to begin is to look very specifically at what asexuality is describing, a relationship to sexual attraction, that directed want. So if you are experiencing or have experienced for, a period of your life, or it's a pattern of experience in your life where you do not look at other people and think, hey, I could have sex with them, or hey, I'm interested in having sex with them, you are maybe exhibiting a pattern of experience where you are not or rarely experiencing sexual attraction. And that would be described by asexuality. Whereas on the other hand, if your experience is more like, I look around and I see people that I am sexually attracted to, that I do think, oh, hey, I would have sex with them, but you're just not interested in doing it, or, you don't really ever have a big drive to go and do it. You feel attracted to them, but you just don't feel like doing it. That may be more appropriately or accurately described as having a low libido. And that may not necessarily be asexuality. Now, that differentiation is not like a hard and fast boundary. So that's not me saying if it's this, it's this, if it's that, and there is no gray area. That's the trouble with all of this. Like, human sexuality and like our experience of sexual orientation is kind of like almost always a gray area. But those two things become maybe starting points for you to think through your own specific experience. It's also important here to think about language and how this language is being used, particularly the language of asexuality. So if you've watched any amount of my videos here or on TikTok, you know that there are like a lot of words to describe asexuality and a lot of words to describe like how one experiences it. There are a lot of identity labels. There are a lot of like demarcations about like how you can combine those words to describe very specific things, like lots of words for asexuality. And for, I think that's a wonderful thing, because I think the more words you have to describe your experience, the better off you are. If you have more tools, you can do more things. But a lot of people get really anxious about that amount of words, and they feel like they have to somehow take their experience and shove them into the very boxed off boundaries that these words create. When you take each of the words in the language of asexuality and look at its definition, they're thinking, well, I've got to make sure that I can fit my experience into one of these boxes, and I have to fit it perfectly, otherwise I can't like use it. That anxiety is like not the way that we should be thinking about the language of asexuality. So while I think it's great that people want to kind of parse out, am I asexual or is it low libido, and like want to parse out the difference, sometimes I think that you're putting undue pressure on yourself to parse your experience out, and you're creating obstacles for like just yourself to just sort of experience your life. The right way for this to work, this relationship to the language of identity, you should look at your experience and take it, and then look at the words around and figure out which words best describe what's happening to you. And you pull the ones that do explain and describe your experience, and you leave the ones that don't. So sure, you can parse out very specifically based on the definitions whether or not your experience is asexuality or it's a low libido, and then you can make decisions about how you're going to kind of move forward from there. But I also think you can just experience what you want. You can grab the language of asexuality for a period of time if you think that might be it, and see how that feels for you, if that works for you, and you're feeling empowered by that language, and you're feeling like it does describe who you are and how you're experiencing the world, and it's allowing you to build community with other people who experience the same thing, and it's working for you, then you can call yourself asexual. You're asexual. That's an appropriate use of that word. If it's the other direction, if you want to like move in the opposite way and say, well, it's probably a libido thing, you can address that in that way. You can use a different set of words to describe your experience and follow that particular path. You can also move back and forth between the two. If the language of asexuality works now and doesn't later, then use it now and change it later. And the opposite is true as well. If, now you just want to sort of operate operate through this lens of, I just have a little interest in sex, that's fine. But if later you want to embrace the language of asexuality because it feels more correct, then you can make that jump and move from this to this. Labels are tools, not tests. They exist to help us, not the other way around. So yeah, there are distinctions, but ultimately you get to decide where you fall among those distinctions. You know your experience better than anybody. You live your experience and no one else does. So you get to determine which words accurately describe the thing you are experiencing. Let the words work for you. Good luck.